All right.
Hey, almost there, Tish. We are almost live, it looks like, and we are live. There we go. Hi, Tish. How
Good
are you this
morning.
morning?
I am swell.
Well, on this dreary, rainy Columbia morning. So,
It's not snowing.
hey, great point. Great point. Great point.
I
I
left
needed a
the
little.
office last night. It was doing that almost snow thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm fine.
Good, good. We'll take it. We'll take it. So I needed to pick me up this morning. So I said, I'm wearing a spring shirt. We're going to make this happen. But welcome to Tish. Welcome to all of our viewers out there. Thank you all for joining us on this Facebook Live event. Special guest, Tish Johnson. And Tish, you work here with MU Extension. I want to just give you a few minutes. Talk to me a little bit about what you do and how long you have been with MU Extension.
So I am a community development specialist. Title has changed a little bit over the years. I don't care. I'm still a community development person. And I've been doing that now for 26 years for Extension. The last 7 here in Boone County in the middle of the state.
Long time, a career with Extension then.
You know, I love it. When I started with Extension, I said I would stay about 5 years, you know, or until if the work I was doing was still valued and still relevant. But the thing about communities is we are evolving as society, we are evolving. So there's always new issues or newer priorities is more accurate. So yeah, I love doing it.
Well, we love having you. You have been just such a vital asset to MU Extension. So I just want to thank you for your time and your service here, and definitely for being on with us today. For those that are joining us, please send in the comments. We got Ray moderating the discussion today. Let us know where you're joining from. Tell us if you're here in Columbia, if you're joining us somewhere else. Let us know that you're here. We'd love to hear from you. You know, and Tish, I want to go back while we're getting some of those in. I want to go back to what you had mentioned. When you talk about how everything is changing, right? Things just continuously turn over, and we have new initiatives and new ideas and expectations. And, you know, I know you took on the initiative of starting some DEI training, some training in this diversity, equity, and inclusion. Can you talk a little bit about some of that and your work here with it at MU Extension?
So I'm going to be transparent about this because I think that's what we need to be doing when we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, justice, all of these things. You know, I grew up with somewhat activist parents, and I always said my mother wasn't happy if she wasn't protesting something. They lived at the end of a dead end road, and she would put signs in her yard, and I was like, Mom, nobody's gonna see. She's like, oh, people come down and turn around. So anyhow, that was my mother, and yet. Back, you know, when the events of 2015 and 2016 were happening here, I thought I was enlightened and I was aware. There were a lot of surprises in that for me. And quite frankly, I thought as a nation we were doing better than we were, which I think was a lot of wishful thinking on my part. My background's in social work, and I think my niche in community development, niche, however you want to pronounce it, is that intersection of social work and community development. So it's applying the processes of community development to social issues. It's all about capacity building, right? And working with groups of people to identify and effectively address the issues that they're facing. So if I do my job well, I will work myself out of a job. That's always my goal, is to become irrelevant. And then I'm going to go open up a tiki bar on a beach or something one day. But yeah, that's career goals. I don't know. So when a lot of that was going on, you know, even as early as 2014, that's when it all sort of fell back into focus for me about applying my own background, my own interests, my own heart to these programs. And I thought, this is where I need to be. This is what I need to be working on as a person of privilege who, in many different ways, whether you're, you know, middle class, race, education, I need to be applying that for the higher good, I guess.
Mhm.
Not to be too lofty about it.
Yeah.
I want to help fix things. How about that? That's more about it.
Absolutely. And I love that passion, and I love that drive and that heart. You know, you've spent a lot of time training in this yourself, but not just training in it. I know that you and Dwayne, when we spoke to him last month, there's that practical application piece, you know, of actually not just learning about it, but being intentional about your behaviors when you're out in society.
Absolutely. You know, I'm a work in progress, and that's the first place to start, right? And that's where I started, is I realized I needed to work on myself. And I can't change you. I can only change me and how I think and how I behave, what I support, how I interact with the systems in which I belong, whether it's the workplace, the community, different groups that I participate in. And I need to do better. And I'm still working on that. And I will probably always be working on that. And yeah, my partnership with my colleague, Dwayne T. James, that's been very, very helpful for me. He's got a great mind and the world's best smile. Let's
Yes,
just
he
say
does.
that. I love watching his Facebook Live because he's just got such a great smile. It makes me happy. But Dwayne and I, our brains work differently. He has an engineering background. I have a social work background. So I find our conversations to be very rich, occasionally a little baffling because we do think differently. Mm-hmm. But it's those kind of rich conversations have been so important for my own growth.
Yes. Absolutely. And I'm gonna pick that up here in just a second, because that brings me to something that we talked about last month. We're going to recap our chat with Dwayne a little bit. And I want to hear just kind of getting our viewers in the mindset again of what implicit bias is. So Tish, I'm preparing you for that there. But right now I want to just give shout outs to the folks that I've seen commenting with us. We have Julaine joining us from Cedar Falls, Iowa. We have Ashley in Jefferson City, Missouri. Beth, thanks for being on again there in Fulton. And of course, Miss Ray Lyon is on as well, moderating that chat. So my encouragement is to our viewers, please send in your questions and start sending them in early, because we'd like to touch on as many things that you have for us, especially if you were at part 1 and had some thoughts and we didn't quite get to them. So please go ahead and start sending those in, and I'll keep an eye on the chat. But Tish, I want to go back to that conversation that Dwayne and I had last month, and we really just kind of set the foundation for what implicit bias is, understanding that it is, we all have them, right?
We all have them.
Yeah, and understanding how are we using them? How are they playing out in our day-to-day life? So can you speak to that a little bit more and kind of give our viewers a reminder of implicit bias and what they are and how they work?
Sure. And first off, we use the terms implicit bias and unconscious bias interchangeably. So today I'll probably be using both of those. To be clear, what bias in this context means that we have a preference for or an aversion to a person or a group of people based on assumptions and stereotypes we've formed without our conscious knowledge. Unconscious, right? Mm-hmm. They are associations we've made between members of a group and specific attributes, specific characteristics. It is naturally occurring. It's a way we sort information. You were talking last time about, what was it? We can consciously process 40 pieces of information, but we are bombarded with 11 million.
11 million, yes, ma'am.
Pieces of information. Million. So we have to be able to sort all that out. And how we group these characteristics has a lot to do with how we've learned to do that through our family, through our community, through the cultures in which we reside and we interact. So they are natural, and they're not necessarily a bad thing, but our implicit biases about different groups like race and ethnicities and cultural groups and social groups can have negative impacts on others. Doesn't necessarily mean we don't value diversity and inclusion. It means that we aren't necessarily aware of how our unconscious biases influence our own decisions and behaviors. So when I talk about doing the work for myself, that's part of what I'm trying to dig into. I was reading, I'm a Malcolm Gladwell fan.
Okay.
And in his book, Blink, The Power of Thinking Without Thinking, such a good book, he talks about how in the general population, only about 4% of adult men are 6'2" or taller, 4%. But when they did a random sampling of CEOs, they found that nearly a third were 6'2" or taller. So there could be an unconscious belief there that height correlates to success. So that's one way that all plays out, just with height, right? And we see biases developing around COVID more recently, right? There is a something called the COVID racial, I wrote it down here, COVID racial data tracker, which is a collaboration that includes Boston University. I was looking for the statistics that I've seen, the source of some of those statistics, that, for example, nationwide, people of color have died at much higher rates from COVID than those of white people. So Black people are dying, have died at 1.4 times the rate of white people. So implicit bias may be impacting the ways in which healthcare professionals diagnose and treat people of color, and also maybe the ways in which people of color are interacting with the healthcare systems. So these biases can have very real consequences.
Right.
I'll just go on and on if you let me.
No, absolutely. I have to say, I love these opportunities because I get to be a student as well as a host in this case. And so I really value learning from you right now, Tish. One of the things that you did mention at the beginning, and you started talking about, not always just knowing the stuff, but actually applying it there in your life. And you've done a lot of work around this. And you also mentioned that you use Dwayne T as kind of your colleague, and he thinks very different than you do. And that was actually one of the practical behaviors that Dwayne T and I talked about last month was, finding those allies, people who don't think like you, but can kind of keep you humble in your own perspective. And I thought that was incredibly valuable. And
one of the most common forms of implicit bias is an affinity bias. We have a tendency to gravitate towards people that are similar to ourselves, that are familiar, and we reinforce biases, right? Have you ever been in a situation where, maybe you said, well, those people, that's always a flag for a bias that's, or even a higher level of a prejudice that's being employed. And then somebody else goes, I know, right? And then it's like, okay, my bias just got reinforced. Yeah. And so now we have the beginnings of a group bias that start out. I don't know where I was going with that, but my mind's just kind of spinning off.
No, I think that's a great example. And those were some of the ones we talked briefly last month. I mean, there are several different kinds of biases out there. And that affinity bias, I'd read that as well, being one of those top ones. You think about it, human nature, we want to fit in, right? And so I think that sometimes that plays into these, and why I really thought, again, that point was just so great of recognizing I have to find people that maybe I don't see eye to eye with, that see things through a completely different lens, but we can agree to disagree and still maintain those relationships. You're talking about the consequences that not recognizing your implicit biases can have on relationships with people. And we are social creatures. We have to have those relationships, especially if you're in an area of leadership. And so I want to kind of transition a little bit, some of the things that we touched on last time, and there were a couple questions in the chat, but there was some concern, like, how do I get over that fear? There's a fear of speaking out of my biases, which was another thing Dwayne T had mentioned. When I speak out of my biases, meaning, I'm operating out of the bias this before I make the statement to somebody, that's vulnerable, right? That puts us in a very uncomfortable space. So there's fear around that. How do we overcome that fear?
Well, and I appreciate, because Dwayne actually does do that. He didn't just say that. And I've been in conversations with him in a group where he's actually put that out there. I think it's a part of it's a leadership skill, right? It's stepping out, whether you are in a leadership title or not. I think it is important to kind of own that. And, the first place we start with overcoming our biases. We can't eradicate them, but we can work to minimize their impact, is to gain that understanding into our own biases, right? That's the first step. Whether there's some online assessments like the implicit association test with Harvard. There's things you can do to help facilitate some introspection, like journaling, making a list, having conversations with others. I was thinking about this this week in preparation for this conversation, that I want to dig more into my own understanding, my own biases. And I thought, I'm going to work on this, journaling, making a list. What biases do I have? Where do they come from? Trying to understand them better. I think once you gain that better understanding your own biases, then you can cultivate that awareness about when they are being employed, when you're seeing them in yourself and in a group, and finding some ways to speak up, to acknowledge those, and to lead by example, as Dwayne was talking about.
Absolutely. I know one of the other, and we did get some questions in via email after last month's discussion. And, some of those questions kind of surrounded this idea of what if in my workplace, I have the heart to move forward and to take on some of these initiatives when it comes into creating a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive environment, but it's not as supported by others. And I think you just touched on that a little bit, in the sense that we control us. Right. So it has to start somewhere. And so maybe to that effect, and I'm curious about your opinion on it, it is just starting with you and taking that one small step into changing your behavior. And maybe that could have a ripple effect in the organization. What are your thoughts?
Well, absolutely. And leading by example and being true to your own views on this. And if this is important to you, you're going to find a way to get it out there. And you and I were talking before, I realized that for people who aren't feeling as secure in their workplace, maybe it's not, they're just not feeling like they can speak out as much. It's a way of, are there talking, I would suggest talking with some other like-minded people or some allies to find what can I do. And it may be that working outside of the workplace to help build up your vocabulary for talking about these issues, for having these conversations, because where we need to get to is to the leadership. And if leadership will embrace that we want to have a more inclusive, a more equitable workplace, and not just giving lip service to it. We're not just going to write a statement and not change anything. We're going to take a hard look at our organization. We're going to be honest about it. We're not going to make excuses, and maybe set some goals if you have a strategic plan for your business, incorporating these DEI standards and benchmarks. If we talk about DEI and we have trainings, but all of our leadership are white males of a certain age, how committed are we? And what is that telling not only our employees, but our other constituents, our customers, our stakeholders that we interact with?
Absolutely. And people see those discrepancies, your customers, your clients,
they see
your
those
employees.
Discrepancies.
Yeah, they'll see that. And I really value what you said, is not just giving it lip service. You can say the words all day, but are you really thinking action on this practical application? And I'll tell you, as a trainer, I've been a little amazed in different groups that I've worked within, where thinking about an actual behavior of something is very, very different than the concept. And it's hard for a lot of my participants, to think about, what does that look like? What does that sound like? What is the actual practical behavior we're going to implement, that action that we're going to implement? And I think that's maybe what you're speaking to a little bit there. It's one thing, put it in your mission, put it in statements, but what is the practical application?
I sometimes feel like there's this glass barrier between walking the talk and just talking, right? So if we're going to have more seats at the table, if we're going to have more representation at the table, then we either need to add more seats or there are people who are not going to be at the table, right? I mean, that's kind of a not a very clear way of saying it, but when a community, when an organization, when a business does not want to change, does not want to look at how they are doing business, to look to see whether they are being fair and equitable in all of their hiring practices, promotion, project leadership, all of these things. If we're not being honest about that and making those changes, it's just not going to be effective. But people don't want to make those changes. They don't want to acknowledge that we're doing anything wrong or that could be improved.
Right.
Maybe it's not wrong as much as I look at all this. We were talking about at the beginning about changing. I look at this as an evolution, right? Society evolves. It always will. It always does. That's a part of human nature.
Right.
And diversity's been around since humans have been around, but we've reached a point as a society, we've reached this tipping point where these structural inequities are no longer acceptable. And we need to do better. 20, 40 years from now, we're going to see some very different demographics in this country when there will no longer be a white majority. Right? That's what the census data shows us. We are becoming a more diverse nation, and that brings with it so many strengths and opportunities, and it makes us better as a nation. And that's backed up by research. There's a lot of research into the diversity of groups and what does that mean. And it strengthens them. That's always a hard word to say, strengthen.
Yes. Well, and I think Dwayne T and I joked a little bit last month. I said, I don't know about y'all, but I don't want a bunch of me's running around. I want people that have that different way of thinking, because that's where we get that innovation. That's where we get the momentum, the energy, the vibrance that makes this US as beautiful as it really is. And I think that that's important to remember. I appreciate you kind of talking a little bit about, and I'm going to sum it up to saying kind of why some of these programs that we're implementing in organizations are failing a little bit, lacking some of that practical application. We'll do the training. Okay, we'll check the box. We say that all the, it's not that. All right. It's not just that. We can't just stop there. So I want to transition because we're getting a couple good questions in here. But I want to just kind of get real quickly, when you think about leadership, all right, if we're really trying to make these changes and you lead by example first, are there any other suggestions you would give to really being intentional about interrupting biases in the workplace from a leader's perspective? How would we do that? I put her on the spot.
I know. Well, there's the short answer and the long answer. And the short answer has to do with what do you do in the moment, right? And I think it's if you are feeling that you can take the risk to say, I feel like we are perhaps making some assumptions here. We talk about in some DEI programming, there are some hot button terms out there, right? If you use the word privilege, people can have a very strong reaction to it. But if you say advantages, so if we talk about, maybe we're making some associations here, we're making some assumptions based on this person's last name, based on where this person currently lives. That sort of thing. That is important. It's not as risky to speak up and say it that way and start that conversation in the group. Maybe we're talking about hiring someone. The thing about one of the most insidious forms of racism and isms in general are when they are disguised as kindness. My mother used to talk about this. She used to say the worst kind of racist is the person who doesn't think they are a racist. And what I mean by that is, so I've been in interviews where on like with the in extension teams in filling positions in other counties, where I've heard people say things like, well, I don't know that he'd be comfortable here. I'm afraid, people might not talk to him as much. He just wouldn't fit in, and that just wouldn't be fair to him. Well, I'm pretty sure he knows who he is. And I'm pretty sure he's been dealing with, whatever form of prejudice is being expressed there many times before. And you're not going to save him from that by not hiring him. So that kind of crap needs to be called out.
Yeah.
That needs to be, I think there was a time where that kind of thing is said in a group, and it's like, well, maybe I'll let it go, because we really are just trying to do the right thing by, the candidate. Well, no, you're not. When we hired, I was in St. Genevieve County for many years, and we hired a woman to fill an ag position, which is no longer an unusual thing, but back then it was. And I had some people call and literally say, don't you have a man I can talk to? And I thought, first of all, my brain went, you need to evolve already. But the answer was no. This is the most qualified individual to answer your questions. And I wasn't putting up with it. And, and they came to love her because she knew her stuff. She was very good, which is why we hired her in the first place. And so I do think, you don't need to always hit people over the head with this. You can be kind. I'm really working right now on trying to practice grace and kindness, and giving people the space to learn, the space to evolve, the space to question, and not just being self-righteous, smack them in the head. I hope I don't do that, but I feel like internally I do sometimes. And that could come out in my behavior and in my words. And I don't want to be that person. It's not helpful.
Well, and I think, just going back to what you said at the very beginning, your passion behind this.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes, we have to stop as people and recognize what's the motivation behind this person, calling me out on me saying this, or this person, saying what they said here. We need to look at the motivation behind it and really just give people the benefit of the doubt that good intentions, right? People have generally good intentions.
They do. They absolutely do.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that what we say and do isn't harmful. We were talking a little bit, I know we want to talk more, maybe at a later date about microaggressions, but a lot of microaggressions are well-intended. It doesn't mean they're harmful. So I have a whole list of microaggressions that I've sometimes used in its statements that I've used in programs. And I ask people to find those that they relate to, that they've heard, or that speak out to them. And one that always gets comments is, she has such a pretty face. And people go, well, that's a compliment. But here's the thing, it's not, because that is a statement that's often said to people like me, or when I was younger, who are large, who are overweight. And it is discrediting the whole. It is saying, when I hear something like that, it doesn't sound like a compliment. It cuts deep. Mm-hmm. It is an insult. And if you're not a member of that group, you may not understand that.
Sure. Go ahead, Tish.
No, I was talking with colleagues last week about age, and because I just had a birthday, one of those that ends in a 0, we don't like those, but and she's on the younger end of the spectrum. And so she has encountered people saying things like, oh, you seem to know a lot about this for someone so young, or for someone so new in your career. And just these little, intended to be a compliment, but it really isn't. And I get the other end as, because I love innovation and technology and ideas, But the perception may be because of my age that I'm stuck in the mud, right? I don't want to change. And so then I get the opposite comments about, oh, I wouldn't think someone like you would.
Oh, well, that's a great transition. I do want to speak to that a little bit. We're going to touch on that here. And then I'll tell you just to kind of prep as well, Tish, we have a question in the comments here asking about critical race theory.
Okay.
And I'm going to see where we're at with that. You good? Okay. All right. Well, we'll head that direction. Let's do this. So I want to hear from our folks. Seeing a lot of engagement. Thank you all so much. Speaking about this idea of microaggressions, and Tish kind of defined it there a little bit for us. I want to know from you all right, as you think about things that maybe have been said to you, what are some examples of things like the one Tish gave where it just kind of cut deep, all right, even though someone might have thought it was coming from a common or even a caring place. What are some of those things that have occurred in your life? Or maybe you're on that other sending end, not so much receiving, but maybe you said something and came back and went, maybe I shouldn't have done that. Share those with us in the comments, please. I'd love to see those, and we'll start speaking to those a little bit. But with the microaggressions, I guess, tell me how that, and even if it's one little statement, how it can actually continue to build and affect the workplace overall.
It can actually lead to creating a more hostile work environment. And if you feel like you're being torn down, and it's not even always a specific statement. And I'll give you an example. I was talking with, again, some colleagues last week about younger women in the workplace. And we were talking about tone of voice. And when you're younger, your voice tends to be a little higher pitched. When we are nervous, women tend to be more deferential in group settings. So we will often speak with a question at the end, like I just did. We will raise our tone of voice. And there's some complex psychology behind this, but in a group setting, it can lead to even other women interrupting us, not taking our ideas seriously. I've seen, so there are some ways that plays out. So if you're aware that someone is getting interrupted, maybe you call, hang on a second, I don't think she was finished, or I don't think he was finished speaking. Can you say what you were, finish what you were saying? Yeah. So just kind of tuning in sometimes to where these are appearing can be really helpful for the group and for the individual who's perhaps perpetuating the microaggression to step back a minute and go, oh, wait a minute, because I've done them, right? And I'm sure I still do them, and I'm working on identifying them when they happen. And it's like, oh, I don't think that's what I wanted to say. Maybe I've said it before, but now it's not, I don't find it conducive to the kind of person I want to be, to the kind of professional I want to be, and to my role in this group.
Sure. Yeah, great examples. We have some others coming in here too. I have somebody mentioning she's had people act surprised that she had a master's degree when her colleagues who were both older and younger than them didn't get the same reaction. So maybe something based, I don't know, Keitra, maybe what you appearance or what that was based off, but certainly maybe affected her as she walked away from that conversation. Dwayne T is on with us as well.
I think he's driving.
He's a busy man. So he's saying that he's actually started asking follow-up questions when leaders say or act in a way that might not be very inclusive. And so I like that. And maybe that's
Dwayne, a great strategy. That is a great, and even to say, well, what did you mean by that? Or can you tell me more about that? And asking questions is almost always a great strategy for addressing, microaggressions or instances of bias, any kind of DEI issue when that occurs, kind of causing the person who is exhibiting the behavior or making the statement to reflect on what they've said and try to justify it, which usually can't really happen.
Right.
But if it does, it can lead to to a really positive conversation about where we're at with this.
Yeah, I love that. And Dwayne T put some suggestions in the comments as well. So take a look at those. We're seeing some other microaggressions interviewing for a position here at Mizzou. Dean, who was interviewing, asked what it would be like for me coming up for tenure as an out lesbian whose primary area of research and teaching is queer studies. The dean said, we haven't hired any Martians either. Interesting.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. I can say
equating someone who's lesbian to being a Martian. No.
Wow. I'm so
but you know what that's saying? That individual is saying that being heterosexual is the norm. And that's not fair. There may be more heterosexuals, but being lesbian is just as normal as being heterosexual.
Yeah. I just want to say thank you for sharing that too, Elisa.
Yeah.
And I apologize if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly, but thank you for that vulnerability and sharing that with our group. I've had some people say, I've been embarrassed about saying, oh, that test was so easy. It was multiple choice, because not everyone has been able to go through the educational system the same way I have.
Yeah.
So excellent reflection. Elisa did come back on and said, for the record, the dean involved, they're now friends decades later. So that's good. I'm glad that relationship could still be intact there.
Well, and I'm sure she's probably helped him evolve his thinking over those decades.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Again, we all don't have to think alike, right? It's still kind of a mind-blowing experience. We don't have to think alike, but let's be kind.
I don't think it's healthy to live in an echo chamber.
Yeah.
If we look at politics, right? I mean, how divisive it is right now, but I think about my own social media and, I don't put up with people who are, really insulting on any area of the spectrum. I appreciate hearing from some different people, and I like lurking sometimes on different conversations to try and understand where people are coming from, what their priorities are, and you know what, they're not that different.
Yeah.
I have a colleague here who has a very different political viewpoint than I do, but I tell you what, when the two of us are in the car together, we can find agreement on so many issues when it's that one-on-one, because we talk about our priorities. Right. And he'll say, well, I think, what if we do this? And I'm like, oh, I can buy that. Could we do this with that? Oh, okay, good. We got a policy.
Yes. Oh.
So, that human connection, and get away from positions and talk about priorities. Right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Great points, Tish. Thank you. And I know we're coming up. This has gone so quick.
I want to keep talking.
I know. I want to as well. This has been an incredible conversation. I want to get back to that comment earlier, and actually the question earlier from Julaine. She's asking if you could just please define critical race theory.
So it's an academic theory that is taught in law school. It is not taught in grade schools or high schools. It has to do with exploring our history. It doesn't teach, as some people have alluded to, that white people are bad, that white people are all racist. It doesn't teach us to hate ourselves. There's a lot of assumptions that have been stated about critical race theory that are simply not true. It's a dog whistle, okay? It's been put out there that your children are being taught this terrible thing, and it's absolutely not true. And it's being used, I think, as an excuse to try to literally, well, not literally, but figuratively, whitewash our history, that we don't want to talk about slavery. We could go on and on about this one, but by the way, and I would be happy to have conversations with anyone about any of these issues, because that's how I grow.
Absolutely. I love that, Tish, and thank you for being open to those conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll meet for breakfast somewhere.
Yeah, I love it. I'm looking forward to doing that with you. And
there's a new First Watch on this side of town, so
there you go. Tish is she is joining us. She's actually at the Boone County MU Extension office. So she's here in Columbia, but a few miles down the road. And
yes, I do want to say I'm a field specialist, so I don't just cover Boone County. I cover a much wider area and have done trainings in St. Louis with Dwayne. And yeah, I'm not just open to conversations locally. So.
Perfect. I love that. And I did drop your contact information in the description here. So you should find that at your MU extension page. And so you can contact Tish. She's opened up that opportunity if you want to continue having any of these conversations. There's a lot of great resources that I'm seeing being put in the comment section. So I encourage you. Yeah, take a look at some of those. If you have any other resources, Tish, I'll get in touch with you after we end today, and I can upload those into the comment section as well. But as always, we just want to thank you. Thank you all for who have joined us. And Tish, thank you for your expertise. Thank you for your time. This has been really, really valuable. So any final thoughts before we go ahead and close out, Tish?
No, I just want to keep talking. I want to continue these dialogues. I think it's good for community and good for us as individuals. It's good for me as an individual. One thing we're going to be doing more in extension, Dwayne and I are both working on some civil dialogues around race and racism, because they are dialogues, understanding who we are as a community, who we want to be as a community, and maybe how we might close that gap.
Perfect. I love that. I look forward to some of that training as well, Tish. So thank you. Thank you for everything you're doing. Thank you for what you do for MU Extension and our community as a whole, our state, all of it.
It is absolutely my honor.
Well, it's been a pleasure. And we will continue these. You know, I will encourage everybody who's on this call, if you have other questions, other thoughts, topic ideas, maybe around this topic that we've done. This was part 2 of our implicit bias in the workplace sessions. But we're happy to
kind of got away from that.
Yeah, no, it's okay. It's okay. I think these are important conversations. And so send those topic ideas into us. The link is in the description here. And I'm going to go ahead and sign us off, Tish, with Ray, I'm going to take it from you. Sorry. But everyone out there, go be great.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.